Now, I believe that authenticity is the coin of the realm when it comes to law school admissions. And so I would urge you not to be the person that you think I or an admissions committee wants you to be. I want you to be the person that you are and demonstrate that for all that makes you special and unique. Your essay is one of the best ways for us to consider your writing skills and to some extent your analytical skills. Some of the most common mistakes that I've seen and I think my colleagues have seen. And we'll start here with misspelling and proofreading issues.
Welcome and thank you for joining us today for another Justia webinar. My name is Nina and I'll be the moderator for today. Now to go ahead and kick things off, I want to go ahead and introduce our speaker, Shane D. Cooper. Shane Cooper is the Senior Associate Dean of Admissions, Financial Aid and Student Services at Cornell Law School. In his role, he leads JD recruitment efforts and efforts to retain and support the current student body. He also provides strategic direction to the Dean of Student Staff on all aspects of counseling and student case management, serves as the primary point of contact for the Faculty Administrative Committee, and is the Officer of Record for Character and Fitness Certification for bar authorities. He previously served as the Associate Dean for Administration and Enrollment at the University of New Hampshire Law School, overseeing admissions, enrollment management, and administrative activities. The webinar that you're about to watch will be approximately 1 hour. Shane will present some information and then we'll be taking questions from the audience. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask related to our webinar topic today, you can go ahead and submit those by clicking the Q&A button in the control panel at the bottom of your screen and sending those in. We would love to hear from you. And without further ado, here is Shane to discuss law school admissions, how to stand out and get in.
Thank you, Nina. I really appreciate that kind introduction. Good day to all of you. I want to thank the Justia team for inviting me to present on the topic of law school admissions, how to stand out and get in. I do want to be clear, though, that although I'm part of the Cornell Law School community, I'm not here to recruit for any particular law school. In line with Justia's mission to make law and legal resources free for all, I'm hoping that this webinar will serve as a general free resource for those that are applying to law school or thinking about applying to law school. The opinions and advice that I'm offering today are solely my own views and don't necessarily reflect the views of Cornell Law School or other institutions that I have worked for in the past. And in particular with subjective matters like admissions, it's likely that you may hear slightly different or even contradictory advice from others. And so I hope you'll take my advice and the information I offer today in that light. Okay, so now on to our agenda. So as promised by the advertisements for this session, I'll be covering the following topics today. What law school admissions committees look for beyond grades and test scores, and I do have a disclaimer about that on the next slide. Crafting a compelling personal statement. Avoiding common mistakes in applications. How your past experiences can amplify your candidacy. And then, of course, a question and answer session. And I really enjoy those. So I look forward to any questions that you have, and I'll answer those to the best of my ability. All right, this is a pretty busy slide. 3 buckets here, kind of how my brain works. This isn't exactly how maybe all admissions people look at this, but this is just one way to represent what I think law school admissions committees are looking for. And before I dive into those 3 buckets that I've identified in this slide, I do want to cover one disclaimer. At the outset, we talked about how today we're going to talk about things beyond grades and test scores. And so while admissions are holistic, I want to acknowledge that they are strongly driven by an applicant's undergraduate grades, to a lesser extent, one's graduate studies if applicable, and one's standardized test score. Predominantly, it's the law school admissions test, the LSAT. Perhaps it's the graduate record examination, the GRE. And in some cases, there are alternative tests accepted by some schools that are emerging, like the JD Next test. And there are some schools that have sought and have variances where test scores are not required as part of admissions. But typically, law school admissions do take these harder metrics into account. And we tend to rely on these to statistically predict the likelihood of academic success at one's law school. So when I look at these metrics, I'm always asking myself, will this applicant succeed and thrive academically at this law school? And to be candid and transparent, the historical impact of ranking systems had once placed a very high premium on schools' median test scores and GPAs, and they continue to have a strong impact on how most law school admissions committees approach their decision-making. So I don't want to discourage you from applying to a law school where their reported medians may be higher than your scores. I want you to be reassured that the schools that I've worked at, and with other colleagues I've spoken to at the schools they've worked at, there are applicants that we will admit below median numbers for all sorts of reasons, and we still believe strongly they will succeed academically at our law school. But I do want to inject some realism here so that you can strategically decide upon the range of schools to best optimize your chances of admission so that you have a broad range of options towards the end of the admission cycle when you make that important decision of where you will attend law school. Okay, so with that out of the way, now let's assume you've identified a good range of schools. The rest of this webinar is dedicated to how we can maximize your chances of admission to stand out and get in as we advertise at the opening. So in the holistic review process, I've outlined 3 buckets here, which I believe are opportunities for you to shine. Now, the first bucket involves personal statements, essays, optional essays, any opportunity to provide in your own words and an opportunity to speak to the admissions committee about yourself. Now, sometimes this will take the form of a Word or a PDF document of 1, 2, or a few pages, depending on the school. However, I also don't want you to discount those optional, sometimes mandatory opportunities in short text boxes or short answer questions that you may see perhaps in more informal ways within the law school application. These can be some great opportunities to also catch the file reader's attention, both in positive and negative ways. So I would say proofreading and all of those other things apply, tips that I'll give you later. All right, so here are a few tips to consider for the personal statements and essays. Number one, and the most important part, in my opinion, is that your essay should be compelling. In many ways, this should be the number one primary thought as you write your essay. Imagine file readers or committee members who are wading through several applications in one sitting, one evening, one afternoon. Your goal is to be one of those memorable ones. And please know, you don't have to be a celebrity to stand out or to do this. All of us, except a rare few, are ordinary citizens. But we all have unique, special, and I dare say extraordinary aspects to each of us. And as an admissions officer, it's one of my greatest pleasures when I come across an application that connects with me and catches my attention. So we'll talk a lot more about how to be compelling in your statements on the next slide. Excuse me. So very closely related is the concept of being authentic and genuine. Now, I believe that authenticity is the coin of the realm when it comes to law school admissions. I've participated in several information sessions, listened to several podcasts of other colleagues, and in the admissions community. It's always struck me how many times I hear this advice from my colleagues, and what I also offer is how important it is to be yourself, to be authentic and genuine. You know, you can ask yourself in your own experiences, can you spot when a person is being fake? And I think many times all of us can, and so can admissions officers. And so I would urge you not to be the person that you think I or an admissions committee wants you to be. I want you to be the person that you are and demonstrate that for all that makes you special and unique. And then you'll just have to trust that you will be accepted and appreciated for that by the law schools that best fit for you. Okay, so once you've hit those primary goals of compelling, authentic, and being genuine, then there are some other prerequisites that I'll call them. Your essay is one of the best ways for us to consider your writing skills and to some extent your analytical skills. I say analytical skills in the sense that I want to know how you assess and perceive yourself. How self-aware are you? I should be able to tell by your essays and the ways you describe and show your experiences. Finally, remember that this is a law school admissions essay, so it's fair to state that we should be left with some idea as to why you are interested in law school. Now, I don't expect to have you to have exactly worked out what area of law or what field of practice that you'll be practicing in the future. Some of you have more well-defined ideas about that than others based on life experience. But if we just get an interesting story from you, but we have no way of connecting it as to why law school, then I think that's a missed opportunity in your statement. And I think as a related matter, when an applicant can best describe and clarify why they are pursuing their legal studies, we tend to get a better sense of how you are going to be a positive contributor to our law school community and to our learning environment. All right, so moving on to the second bucket, which may not be one that maybe you've necessarily thought about much as you're working at your paper applications or your online applications, because it doesn't necessarily come up in the earlier stages in most cases. But that is the bucket that I'll call that deals with live or pre-recorded interactions with admissions teams, interviews, meetings with officers, etc. Now, some law schools don't offer an interview phase. It's going to be a completely paper process. So this may be a bucket you don't necessarily think about in all cases. However, I would note there is a growing trend that a school will incorporate some form of interview, video essays, or other formal or informal meeting or interview with an applicant. Now, I don't mean this to be the short encounter that you have at a law fair table or at a law school forum, but I do mean that if you visit a school, you meet with a student admissions ambassador or an admissions officer who's touring you about, I do recommend that you treat those interactions with some intentionality and with care. You absolutely want to treat those invitations to interview, the offer of a video essay, or some other invited meeting with an admissions team member very seriously, and as a great opportunity, and frankly, I think a positive sign that law school wants to get to know you better. And when these opportunities arise, the best analogy that I can come up with is that I treat it like a job interview or a job exploration. In these interactions, you want to come across with a professional demeanor. If it's in person, then dress appropriately for the occasion. Treat it with a sense of formality while also being authentic to yourself. Demonstrate kindness, politeness, and engage in the process. And as you answer questions in that interview format, for example, in many cases, these will likely be cognitive behavioral questions that one would encounter in a job interview. So for example, tell me about a time when you had this experience and what did you do and what did you learn from this? In these cases, you are demonstrating your level of self-awareness, your maturity, and frankly, I personally am thinking in terms of your employability. Whether for better or worse, we are starting to see market trends and have seen recent market trends in the legal sectors that have significantly accelerated hiring decisions and recruiting activities well into and early into the 1L year. So for our own benefit, I'm trying to project, and I'm sorry, for our benefit, the law school, but also your benefit, I'm trying to project, can I see you handling yourself well in a formal job interview in, let's say, 9 or so months from now? Law school is a professional school. Now, to some extent, I think higher education may not necessarily be lockstep with solely getting you ready for a career and a job. There are other purposes for higher education. But in my opinion, law schools as professional schools primarily exist to get you ready for the practice of law. In other words, this is a professional vocation, a job, and I need to sense whether you're going to be able to thrive in that job market and fairly soon. So in my view, this second bucket will continue to increase in prominence as we focus on these factors. Finally, as an admissions officer who lives in the law school community that you're about to join, and in my personal case, as you heard, I maintain involvement with students with respect to student services responsibilities I have, I'm extremely invested in making sure that all students that join us are going to be positive contributors to our community and are going to thrive here and have an excellent experience. And so much of some of that, your potential to thrive in this environment and to be a positive contributor to our community can be detected in this second bucket. Finally, the third bucket, talking about resumes and letters of recommendation. So for the resume, think back to what I said about employability. Will you be ready to go in the workplace or in job interviews in about 9 months or so? The resume is at least some starting point to determine your past professional experiences. I may get a sense of your work ethic from it. Did you work as a server at a restaurant during college to make ends meet? Have you served in various professional office settings? Were you in positions of leadership or other activities that involve the exercise of discretion and judgment and other independence? There is no one winning formula here, but a good resume can certainly tell a story that supplements and adds another dimension to what I'm learning from your personal statements or a possible interview. And One note for us law school admissions resume, this is not like a job seeking resume in some respects. I would encourage you to provide a short interest and hobbies section at the end of the resume. I think it helps to humanize you. Perhaps there's something there that may resonate with the file reader, or at least catch their interest and perhaps even make you just a little memorable to stand out. Consider me as an admissions officer the next day going through a whole pile of files, talking with a colleague, and we're sitting there talking, say, hey, what did you think about that chess boxer? You're like, what? All right, so they also had other amazing qualities and attributes in their application. Hopefully this is not the point in the webinar where you're on your phone Googling what a chess boxer is. But as you can tell, I've demonstrated how perhaps even something as small as that or simple as that in the interest hobby sections might catch someone's attention and make you a little more memorable. So finally, letters of recommendation. So this is interesting. I think in this area, the bar is already set sort of high here, because why in the world would you ask a recommender who is going to write something lukewarm about you to do a recommendation? So this is an area where I tend to see a lot of inflation and sometimes hyperbolic descriptions of our applicants. And in some ways, it's almost expected. However, I find that the most effective letters of recommendation are those that are most compelling, that are written by supervisors, professors, or other mentors that know you very well and can speak to specific accomplishments and your attributes, your work ethic, other positive character traits. And hopefully, this letter of recommendation all lines up with how you describe yourself and portray yourself in other parts of your application. Now, as you've been working through this busy slide, you're probably noticing certain qualities are repeating across the three buckets, and that was intentional on my part, because I think that a good, high-quality, holistic application is going to have complementary pieces to it by using all the various opportunities and modalities to show those positive attributes about yourself to the admissions committee. All right, we're going to move on to the next slide and talk in more detail about crafting a compelling personal statement. So I said earlier that the goal is to be memorable and compelling, memorable in a good way. So here are some general pieces of advice. First, don't waste your words in the allotted space. You need to come out of the gates immediately. No wasted preludes. Start with something compelling. I've typically read compelling statements that draw the reader in with a vivid example, perhaps an experience in one's life, or declaratory bold statement that begins a theme you'll carry through. But whatever it is, the goal is to catch the reader's attention immediately. File readers are human. We are all fallible. You may be the first application that it's about to be read or in that sitting, or you could be the 10th. You may or may not catch us on our best day as we settle in to read your essay. We try our best to be diligent. We try our best to have more than one person, I know in our case, to be reviewing these applications. But it is so much easier to pay attention and carefully consider an engaging, well-crafted statement. Typically, the essays that grab our attention will be those that show and do not tell. You'll offer examples from your experiences to give us a glimpse of who you are or how that example embodies who you are. Perhaps as a brainstorming exercise, think back to some of the most impactful moments in your life. Now, some are appropriate for a law school essay, especially if they demonstrate who you are, paint you in a positive light, and can somehow be connected to your future. Which brings me to my next point. If you get me hooked in with a compelling narrative, the next thing I need to know is how it connects to why you're applying to law school and where are you headed from here. And so as you show me who you are and where you're going, I also want to get a sense that you have the emotional intelligence to be able to step outside yourself and are able to reflect on your growth and show us your sense of self-awareness. Now, this could be school specific, but you'll also want to pay careful attention to the prompts that are offered. Perhaps you'll be able to use a generic statement widely at several schools that you're applying to, but sometimes you may need to tailor or tweak your statement to be responsive to the school's prompts. In some cases, you may need to write a completely different statement that fit for that school's application. And in other cases, you may have the chance to address why that school, in this so-called YX essay that we call it sometimes, why that school is important to you in either an optional or required essay. And these are great opportunities to connect with that school to the extent that you have a strong interest or connection. Now, finally, please leave a favorable and optimistic impression. This is not an exercise in fiction or tragedy. So even if you describe adversity in your essay, I advise you to leave the reader with the positive so what. How will you use what you learned and experienced through that obstacle or adversity overcome or other life experiences, and then leverage those in your law school experience? And how will you all turn that into a positive as it relates to your future career path? All right, so moving on, we're going to now talk about some of the most common mistakes that I've seen and I think my colleagues have seen. And we'll start here with misspelling and proofreading issues. As I say that out loud, I'm now like looking at my slide. Did I misspell or not proofread? But the expectation here is that you spent time and care crafting these applications. Do not send these in haste late at night when you're blurry-eyed and just want to get it off your plate because you've been spending the entire day or weeks on it. I am very guilty of this myself. So many times, more than I can count, I will find odd phrasing or errors in things that I've drafted. And it really just takes stepping away from what you've drafted, taking the time to take a look at it once again. And as the best practice, I would ask you to get another set of eyes from trusted people to help you catch errors or that odd phrasing that you are going to glaze right past after you've reviewed your statement for the 100th time. And I think that extra set of eyes will serve you well. Another common area that we see is not following the directions of the law school concerning their application format, their length, or other guidelines. Now, whether you intend it or not, by not following those guidelines, it does reflect a sense of carelessness or a lack of attention to detail. And in the worst case, a sense or leaving an impression that perhaps the rules don't apply in your case, that it's better to stretch that extra page because those next words are so vital when everyone else mostly has been abiding by those format and length limits. Now, those experiences can vary, and I would say some schools have different levels of formatting or strictness regarding their rules versus others. So I think it's very good to check and read each of those directions carefully because they do differ case by case. Now, I said on the last slide that being compelling is about showing and not telling. So, of course, the reverse is the mistake here, which is telling instead of showing. So, for example, the sentence in an essay that says, "I have always wanted to be a lawyer since I was a child." In my opinion, that's telling and it's cliche. So what I'd recommend is that if you're going to go down the line of a childhood experience, is that you should describe that formative experience in context. Take me to the scene. Recall I said earlier, think about those most impactful moments in your life. Maybe that childhood experience might qualify, or maybe it won't. But pick those moments carefully as you brainstorm for possible vivid, experiences or hooks or options in your essay. I also emphasize the need for authenticity and being genuine. Nothing gets in the way of your authenticity in a written essay or being genuine in a written statement than being too wordy or stilted or with stiff language, which doesn't sound like you or almost anybody else you've ever had a face-to-face conversation with. This is not the time for a technical report or a legal research paper or some other academic paper. This is not the time to be melodramatic or an attempt at comedy for our entertainment purposes. This is about being yourself in a professional setting. And think about how you would talk about yourself genuinely, candidly, yet professionally. I think you'd hopefully use direct and easy to understand language. Don't let too many written words you would normally not use in your speech to get in the way of your writing in the context of these essays. Another mistake that I've seen is that and I mentioned this in the last slide, but that you just don't connect that essay and mention at all why law school or why we're pursuing this legal education. So while it may be presumed or assumed by the fact that you're applying to law school, we get that part, it's important that within the statement that you're explicit about those reasons. Another mistake that we see is that poorly formatted or poorly structured resume. Now, there are plenty of good templates that are floating around through open research, particularly for law school application resumes. In my opinion, resumes should look boring. They should be standard in format. Nothing should grab my attention in that way when it comes to format. It's all about the words. It's all about what is going on in your professional experience section, your academic section. I mentioned that interest and hobby section, small area of the resume. That's where we're looking for the focus items. Now, as for the letter of recommendations I've alluded to before, what I have seen as a mistake would be an otherwise very good application that is unfortunately undercut by the choice of recommenders who don't know you well, or they don't put great effort in writing much about you that is tangible for us to latch onto. And obviously worse in somewhat rare cases when that recommender says negative or lukewarm things about you. Now, given that you have to trust your recommenders to do this independently of you, I strongly recommend using your judgment to seek out those that you know very well, that you know will speak to specific examples about you, and that you can surmise from what you know of them that they're conscientious, that they're going to put in the effort to write well about you, and that you know them well enough as a mentor or a supervisor or professor that you can be straightforward with them and just politely ask, would you be willing to write a positive letter of recommendation on your behalf? I also get questions about, well, how optional is optional when it comes to these essays from various schools? So on the one hand, I think an optional essay is an opportunity. If you can write a good essay because you're very interested in the school, that YX essay, or you're very interested in the optional prompt based on the question, or you have a good experience to share in relation to that optional essay, then I would advise you never to pass that opportunity up. Now, on the flip side, if you think that you may not put in your best effort, or it may be uninspired, or that optional essay isn't going to be very good, then I think that's an interesting strategic question to ask yourself about whether or not you move forward then with that optional essay. Finally, let's talk briefly about addenda. So most schools either explicitly or implicitly accept addenda in typically three major categories: either a GPA undergraduate studies addendum to explain something about your grades that you don't think positively reflects on you or should be taken into context; an LSAT or standardized test addendum that discusses circumstances about your test scores for various reasons; and then the third type is a character and fitness addendum. Now, in the first two cases, GPA and LSAT addendums or test addendums, I caution generally that more often than not, these addendum will do more harm than good to your application. So with that presumption in mind, I ask you to think carefully about when and why you'd submit these. Perhaps you had a bad semester and then you picked up your grades and can be explained by various personal circumstances for that bad semester. And then you can put it into context by showing how you ended your studies with very positive trends. Or perhaps you want to provide context to a significant increase or decrease between multiple test scores that might lead one to question why there are such variations in those scores. And these very well might be valid addenda, but to the extent that you highlight something that would likely be insignificant or not even perceptible to the admissions reader, that's where I would caution to be circumspect in those occasions. Okay, I take a completely opposite approach to character fitness. In this case, the presumption is over to full disclosure. This is not the time to be cute or circumspect when you're looking at the question in the application from that school to answer that fully, forthrightly, and honestly. That is the approach to take. And you have to believe me, in almost all cases, your character fitness disclosure will not prevent your law school admission. There's rare exceptions, and we can talk about those at a different time and place or one-on-one. But if you fail to disclose matters, which are learned later as you proceed through law school, or when it comes time for you to apply to the state bar exam authority at the end of law school, it can be very problematic if you did not disclose those matters at an earlier point in time. And the law school application process is the place to do that. The law school application remains on file and in some cases is made available to state bar examiners to determine the level of how forthright you were about a particular incident or not. So please, please, please be fully forthcoming as you consider the questions posed to you in your law school applications about character and fitness. All right, the last slide before we go on to our Q&A, and that's talking about your past experiences and how to amplify your candidacy. First, we need to know about it, so you have to talk about it. And this is when you should brag about it. Now, obviously with some humility, but remember the law school application is the time that it is all about you. And we won't know it unless you tell us about it. So I urge you to really amplify and talk about these past experiences. Now, the best way to show instead of tell in this area is by discussing your past work and internship experience in your essay. If it ends up being the compelling subject you choose to focus on, perhaps you might mention it just briefly as in a way to attempt to connect your past to your future. And the rest of it is going to come out in your resume and your letters of recommendation. But I think the most compelling opportunities for you to highlight these experiences in some way during your essay or optional essays, or perhaps even in the interview phase, if applicable in various cases. Now, by doing so, you're going to be able to demonstrate your work ethic, your character, your values, where you've invested your time and effort, how you're positively contributing to society, and your future potential to do so. I want to make a special note for our veterans in the audience and just to assure you to know how valued that your service and experience is by the law school admissions community and admissions committees. And I think it's a great opportunity for you to exemplify your past leadership, your discipline, and your record of public service. So do not shy away from highlighting this experience in your resume, of course, and in your statement or your optional essays. And finally, if you have encountered obstacles or overcome adversity in your life, these can make for very compelling statements when crafted carefully. So as long as you can show and not just tell how you overcame, adapted, and addressed these obstacles and adversity, I think those can make for a really compelling essay. But importantly, it's not only about talking about and showing that particular time in your life and that obstacle adversity, but it's really about how you can connect the dots for the admissions officer to demonstrate how when you overcame those obstacles or that adversity, or as you're addressing those obstacles and adversity currently, how is that going to reflect on your ability to succeed in law school? And how will you be a positive impact to the law school community based on those experiences? So I urge you to consider that connection as well. So with that, I thank you for your patience and for listening to the presentation. And at this point, I'll stop sharing and we can move on to the Q&A section and back to Nina.
Thank you so much, Shane, for all of that insight and for sharing with us today. As we mentioned, we will now move on to questions. As I said at the top of the presentation, if you have questions you'd like to submit, you can go ahead and do so by clicking into the Q&A button in the control panel at the bottom of your screen and sending them in there. We already have a few, Shane, so I'll go ahead and get started. The first one is, for students taking 1 or 2 gap years before applying to law school, is there a right or wrong way to go about those gap years to be a competitive law school applicant?
Thank you for the great question. I'm sort of a gray person, right and wrong. I always feel like trapped in by that. But I will say the best thing to do with your, well, first of all, using the word gap year already sets me up for this. But I say be productive in those years. With work experience, professional experiences, whatever it is, be proactive and engage in something. So what I would say would be the wrong thing to do is taking time away from the professional environment and not really doing anything that is easily showable in your resume or your letter of recommendation. You don't have to be a paralegal at a law office. I'm not talking about working in legal environments. I'm saying do something productive, whether that's in the professional working environment or in the volunteer environment. And then being able to talk about those experiences in your application. So I hope that's responsive because really what I'm looking for is for some productivity in those times away between college and law school.
Awesome. Thanks for that insight, Shane. Our next question is, how long should our personal statements be, and should they be single or double spaced? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure, this is a great question. First, read the directions of each school. Fortunately or unfortunately, every school has their own set of directions. It's not like one common app, if you will, in most cases. So you really have to look at each school. I'll say as a default matter, if given no guidance at all, I am a fan of double space statements. I think it's easier on the eyes. So that would be the first thing. If it's silent, I'd go double spaced. Also, if given no other guidance, which is surprising to me, almost every application likely will, probably no more than 2 pages double space for a standard personal statement. But again, look very, very closely at. For example, I recall at one school I was at, we didn't give length limits. And at the school that I'm at now, we give several prompts. And in our FAQs and our application, we'll say you can answer one or any or some of all of these prompts, and you have up to 5 pages to do that. I'm not saying I get 5 pages all the time, but that's kind of unusual. So I would say read the directions of each school. But if I could kind of stereotype it for you, I'd say go double space. Let's not go over 2 pages. And then obviously read those directions closely. I think I know of one school that's like X point font, this type of margins. I would just say kind of let's be normal about the margins. Let's not try to cram it in. We all know, we've all been there and trying to get into that one page. We know. So just make it look, I'll call it normal.
Thank you, Shane. This next person asks, what GPA and LSAT score do I need to get into a top law school?
Great question as well. First, there is no magic number. And so what we're looking for is a marker of predictability and success academically that you'll thrive there at that school. So a reasonable proxy to look at for sure is looking at schools' ABA 509 disclosure reports. It's a requirement of every law school to report out their admissions and financial aid statistics in these 509 reports. Now, there are some great other resources that will roll up that information. The ABA has a website, lsac.org has a website where you can maybe get all this information more quickly. But generally speaking, I think it's fair to look at the law school's 25th, median, and 75th percentiles for LSAT GPA so that you can know at least mathematically, historically, students who have scores above that median, that's about 50% of the class, and students below that median, that's about 50% of the class, and students at the 25th, well, the math itself works itself out. So I think I said that disclaimer during the presentation is those hard metrics are important, so can't deny it. It can set a sense of probability and realism. I also encourage you not to take yourself out of the running in all cases, and don't let that just discourage you. There are students that we bring in that we believe in academically will thrive at our school that are below that 25th percentile. Not to get too personal, but I guess I will, but I'm one of those 25th percentile or below type of people, right? So in certain cases, I think you're going to see that you will be admitted. But to be real, will the percentages be high in all cases? No, and I think the math can speak to that. So I think that's a way to look at it. On the flip side, if you have numbers that are above the 75th, I get this as well. There are plenty of great people that we do not offer admissions to at various schools because, yes, you've answered the threshold question that you can academically thrive at our school. Absolutely, you can with whatever those numbers may be. But there are those other factors that we just talked about that for various reasons didn't rise to the level, at least in our humble admissions committee's perspective at our school, that didn't lead to an offer of admission. So I don't want people to think that just because the numbers are there, various schools have different ways that they do this, but I don't want to feel like it's an automatic either.
Thank you, Shane. Our next question is, for a student who has taken multiple part-time semesters, would you recommend an addendum to the personal statement, or how would you recommend addressing that in the application?
If you're looking at the and law school applicants, you'll see that you're going to have a credential assembly service report constructed by the Law School Admissions Council, CAS report, and that's what admissions officers see. If you get the sense that there's a lot of columns and years of different schools or part-time, and it looks a little uneven for various reasons, it may be worth identifying what happened there. I transferred from this school to that school, or this came up in my life, and so I went part-time this semester and I went part-time that. So it's could be a reasonable reason to go ahead with addendum. I do caution that I always sort of say, let's be presumptive against doing these addenda. I think it's fair to maybe ask in an informal manner of various admissions officers or teams what they think. I would presume you may get different answers, but you'll probably get a range of answers that might lead you to, in your situation, why it might be appropriate to do that addenda.
Thank you, Shane. Our next question is, what adjustments would you make to these recommendations for someone who's entering law school at a later age? This person says they're 36.
Got it. Well, I think what's great there, right, is that assuming you graduated college sometime before 36, there is a lot to work with in opportunity and time. What did you do with that time? What's that in the resume? What does that look like? So I think I'll speak for myself as a admissions officer. I'm going to be looking at, well, what do we do with that time since college to work? How does that fit in the sort of the arc of your life and why law school now? So I don't know if I call that an adjustment. Just know that I think your file would be looked at in a way that might be different than if I looked at a file someone who's younger, who just graduated from college without as much opportunity and time. It's a little bit of what did you do with the opportunities that you had, sort of approach. So I would hope for this person that's asking the question that you would have an ability to speak to what did you do between your time in college and to the time that's now led you to apply to law school. I'll probably want to know a bit more about why law school for you. What are you going to do with this afterwards? I also want to reassure you that we have plenty of students in our law school and other law schools that are well beyond the age of whatever the person just said, and you are okay. And so don't let that hold you back or be something that you're really worried about. But I do think you lean in heavily into your experiences and your work experience. That is a strength in most cases.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shane. Our next question is, what recommendations would you give to a student who's reapplying to a law school after previously being waitlisted by that institution?
Yeah, for me personally, I enjoy reading those applications in those cases. And in most of the years, we tend to see students join our class after they had been waitlisted and for various reasons chose to reapply and not go to law school the previous year. And we really, I think a lot of us root for those applicants, to reapply to the same law school and to have made the waitlist means obviously you had a strong application to get to that point. But unfortunately, the number of seats available weren't there, at least in that year. The fact that you're reapplying demonstrates a strong interest in that school. And that is something to be appreciated by any law school when you have a reapplicant like that. I would say something I'd say for any reapplicant is it's not the time to just cut and paste everything, send it back in. Something has changed in the last 9 months since the last time you put in the application or whenever it was. So I'd urge you to look back through your application, refresh materials, update those matters just to show some diligence on your part. But I think it's a good sign. It's a good indication for you. Does that mean it's going to work out in all cases? Maybe it doesn't. But I don't want you to think of that as a negative thing coming back in as a reapplicant off of a wait list.
So, thank you. Our next question is, can you expand on why you say test scores aren't everything when determining your admission to law school?
I love this question. It gives me another opportunity because I think I want to take it from the perspective of someone who's got these amazing scores. That tells me one thing typically, which is that obviously you have strong intellect and talent intellectually, and that you will likely succeed in the classroom, which is, job one of an admissions officer is we would not admit you to the law school if we did not think you could succeed at the law school academically. But academics are just one part of law school as a professional school. We're building lawyers who will serve society and who are excellent and have great potential to be great human beings in that society, who will be a positive contributor to the law school community, who demonstrate resilience, who demonstrate emotional intelligence and self-awareness, who demonstrate markers of employability. And so there are people with terrific numbers that are not as high up, if you will, in these other factors that I mentioned. There are people with lower numbers who are off the charts on the things that I just mentioned. So in that holistic approach, fortunately, we have the luxury of just great applicants of all score profiles with all of these other factors. We have the ability, because we just don't have enough spots to offer all the great people, to really think about those other factors. Once you get past that threshold question about whether or not the numbers, hit the academic piece, But I love that question because it gives me this opportunity to really get after this point, which is that it's not just about the numbers. Yes, the numbers are very important, but it's not always about the numbers.
Interesting. Our next question is about letters of recommendation. So this person asks, how can I foster the relationships I need to get the positive letters of recommendations you mentioned?
That's fair. You know, it's different, right? If you're the person that's been in a work environment and you have a direct supervisor. Well, okay. So, and hopefully a good relationship with a direct supervisor. And you got an opportunity right there. But if you are a undergraduate student in a sea of undergraduate students, with a professor in a lecture hall, I get that. So I think how you foster relationships is try to put yourself in positions where you have that hopefully one-on-one sort of interaction. So the lecture professor in a large lecture hall, even if you try to see them in office hours or after class, that may or may not work out well. Being the research assistant or a TA, working at your student services center or career services office and working for administrators, working in your job environment and doing a good job and developing great relationships with supervisors. I think if you can seek out those 1v1 relationships, particularly finding those people that are willing to mentor and lead and guide, it's all about paying it back, right? And so, or paying it forward, whatever the way I should say the phrase. But believe me, like there are people that want to help you. And so because someone helped us. And so if you can seek out those relationships and foster that relationship. And by the way, right, you can't do this if the application's due September 1st, let's say. It's not, by the way, the application's open in many cases. Like you can't start this week, right? Like this is going to take you a little bit of time. So being proactive and a little bit of forethought to think about how to develop those situations that'll put you in that position are helpful.
Thank you, Shane. Our next question is, can you expand on the idea of telling, not showing in your personal statements? What might that look like? Do you have an example?
Yeah, I know I used one in my the slides where I said, I've always wanted to be a lawyer since I was a child. To me, that's telling me. I thrive in stressful situations. I'm a go-getter. Okay, these are all statements that tell me who you are. But describing, a poignant situation that says, I hope I don't try to get too personal here, but I served in the Navy, and I was stationed on a carrier in the middle of the night in the Western Pacific. I was asked to provide legal advice to the squadron commander for rules of engagement as we were flying important missions over XYZ country. And I had to provide some information within about 5 minutes to XYZ person. It tested me morally, personally. So I'm just riffing here, right? But I'm giving you an event in my life that I was like flashing to talk about. What I'd say is you should brainstorm this. Like go back in your life, think about the times, if your life is flashing before your eyes, what are the things that stand out? Now, some of the things that stand out will be personal to you, family, things that may matter in a law school essay, but may not matter for a law school essay. But there will probably be some professionally related ones or personally related that impact the professional life that you can think through that is a really compelling story to tell. And through that story and describing how you acted in that story will help you demonstrate that I'm a go-getter. Demonstrate that ever since I was 5 years old, I would wanted to be a lawyer because of XYZ experience. I think that's what I mean about showing and not telling.
Thank you for clarifying, Shane. Our next question is about LSAT attempts. So, how many times is too many times when taking the LSAT? Do multiple tests affect admissions?
Very good question. I think it's very fact dependent. It really does depend. What do I mean by that? So so the ABA reporting, the 509, is driven by the highest LSAT score that a student generates. So that's how we report out our scores. So there is this natural, I would say, motivation, if you will, that a admissions officer might look at your highest test scores. It might be a marker of your academic success, but it's also the score that gets reported. I personally subscribe, that statistically, at least, the average LSAT score is usually a better predictor. At least that's my understanding of the research. So that's something that I think some admissions teams will take into account as your average score. I guess the reason why I say it depends is that if you take a LSAT and you have a very good score, objectively a good score, but for some reason it's not good enough for you, and you just keep trying to knock it out of the park, and you've taken the thing 5 times, and you're sitting at this really high score on attempt 1. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm thinking through, okay, why are we doing, all these tests? But if we see a dramatic rise, from the first test to the last test, and maybe you have an addendum that could be appropriate in this case that said, look, I took the test cold. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't prepare. And then I did all this preparation, spent some time, and you can see that this last score really reflects what I think my true capabilities are. Then I think taking multiple tests is fine. So I really do think it depends a little bit on your situation, your score profile, your history of scores, the reasons why you're taking it again, and let that guide you. And just know that at least for now, reportable scores are the highest, not the average. And I think that does incentivize the system to, and what I've seen historically, are more tests being taken by our applicants. Back in a day when it was average, I think that's a different incentive, and you may have seen less tests being taken in the past.
Our next question is, how does timing of my application submission change the way my application is evaluated? Does early decision have anything to do with this? What are your thoughts?
Okay, let me set the early decision piece aside for a moment, and let's just talk briefly about this thing called rolling admissions at law schools. In my opinion, there is a sweet spot where it does advantage the applicant to apply earlier in the cycle. I don't think you need to apply September 1st when it really opens, because I'd rather see a high quality application than, rushing to the front door on day 1. That's not, in my opinion, going to get you an advantage. But there is this point in time which can differ from school to school where the mass volume of applications start to come in the door and the opportunities and the seats available start to diminish. So in my experience, when I've seen that earlier phase of applications come through, I tend to see that they get a wider opportunity of admission, whereas someone who's dropping the application into the backside of that application pool just has a harder chance. Now, I think people are going to want me to spit out a magic number, a date, and I'm going to bite the urge to give you that date. I think you really should maybe ask various schools what that looks like. But just imagine this, like kind of like a curve of when the applications come in. Do you want to be in that first, let's say 30 to 50%, or do you want to wait to be the last application to go into the pool? I think you want to be in the earlier side. And so how that timing looks for every school differs a little bit, but I think earlier is better. You don't have to be first, but you certainly don't want to be in that back quarter to third either, in my opinion. So just like I advise my family members out there, I'd say, let's go a little bit earlier with this application. I think it will help you. All right. Early decision, since it was raised. My advice to applicants on early decision is read the fine print of every law school and their early decision process. It differs widely school by school. It differs widely in how decisions are made. It differs widely in how much boost you get out of applying early decision. Your financial aid can differ widely school to school. And that's one piece of advice. Read the fine print. The second piece of advice is that, in my opinion, you need to be all in on that school. Imagine yourself, this is the test, right? If I say I'm going to apply early decision to school A, imagine yourself on the other side of the phone about 2 months later getting a call from the admissions dean of school A, or getting an email from school A and says, congratulations, you've been accepted to XYZ school. In accordance with the terms of your early decision requirement, we expect a deposit in XX days and for you to withdraw all other applications from everywhere else that you've applied to. Do you feel like you're all in on school A that you applied to? If you still feel that strongly that you're in at school A, then that might be your answer for early decision, at least that part of the process. If you have any sense that there is a fear of missing out, any tinge of regret, oh, wait a second, what about that other school that I really fell in love with as I started to apply to it? Then I don't think early decision may be for you. So all in, read the fine print, and then talk to the specific school that you're thinking about, and then let them answer those questions for you in more detail. I have a very certain way that we do it here at Cornell that I would like to think is very equitable and fair. But but that's something we can discuss with those applicants that are thinking about it.
Thank you, Shane. Our next question is from Jamie. They ask, is there a separate standard of admissions for a transfer student who's transferring from an unaccredited law school after their 1L year? If so, what do you think about the baby bar or the FYLSE?
So I'm going to confess that I don't feel qualified enough to talk about the baby bar or the FYLSE. I'd be happy to research and look at that a little bit further, but in my admissions lens, I kind of want to not necessarily talk about stuff that I don't feel like I know as well. But I will say that the transfer application process will differ school by school, and each of those faculty governance rules of their school may have different admission standards. So, for example, at the school that I'm at, one of the schools that I'm at right now, Cornell, we don't, by faculty policy, we do not offer transfer admissions to those coming from unaccredited law schools not with the ABA. I've worked at other places where that could be reviewed by admissions committee for possible admissions. So I think you want to read carefully with those schools what their admissions criteria and policy are for transfer, with respect to whether you're coming from an unaccredited law school or from an accredited law school from the ABA.
Thank you, Shane. Our next question is from Allison. They ask, how important is it to connect with the law school admissions team outside of the application process, like campus visits, webinar attendance, etc.? What would the goals of those interactions be? How should I go about them?
So I think that also depends on the school. So I really hate to say in a wide webinar like this what I think is the answer for every school. I certainly don't know that. My sense is that if you're trying to allocate resources and priority, I don't think allocating into joining every webinar, visiting the school, engaging with that school's team is the highest order priority for you. I think that it can be a positive, but I'm also just mindful of access and equity from my perspective as a missions team. You know, it takes a certain amount of resources to fly up here or to drive up here to central New York and take time out of your day to visit the law school. And while I appreciate and honor that you've taken that time and spent your resources to do that, I'm also mindful of the sea of other great applicants out there that don't have those resources to do that. And I want to make sure everyone gets a fair shake. That's why, at least in our school, we offer this remote distance platform of online interview and assessment that we do for all applicants that we are strongly considering to be admitted to the school, so we can level that playing field. So while I don't want to, I do acknowledge the strength of making personal connections, and I have seen how that can positively impact the students' applicants' opportunity. I also don't want to say to you that is the critical key thing you must do to get into a particular law school. And I'd also say that there's this line of, I don't know, I'm trying to find better words for this, but I kind of call it polite persistence. You know, I hear, and our team hears from many great, eager applicants that are highly interested in the school and want to be a part of it. And they want to demonstrate that to us. But just like you'd imagine as you're trying to, go for that job or, apply for that thing, where you would hope, you kind of know your self-awareness, emotionality, you kind of know where that line is of how much to be politely persistent about it. And then when you've crossed the threshold and maybe thunk your chances based on the interactions that you're having. So I would just say, that's why I mentioned when I talked about when you engage with the admissions teams to, treat that as a professional opportunity, polite, engaging, respectful, and maybe leave it at that polite persistence stage. Someone else has better adjectives for me. Send it to me.
Thank you, Shane. I know we're nearing the top of the hour. I want to be respectful of your time. Do you have time for a couple more questions?
Sure do.
Okay, awesome. So the next question is work experience in the legal field an advantage on a resume, or are most experience valued relatively equally, assuming you demonstrate those meaningful takeaways?
Yeah, I'm thinking of the legions of admissions officers around me to figure out what the survey would say on this. So I would say I am in the camp of, I think any professional experience that demonstrates your excellence is a good opportunity and a good thing. I personally am not attuned and looking for the great paralegal at this law firm. But we admit lots of great paralegals from law firms who are excellent at what they're doing. So I typically advise people to pursue the passions and the things that they enjoy in their work, because when you do, you will be excellent in those things. And then that excellence will shine through if you then decide to apply to law school. So don't pick a professional opportunity just because you think it's going to impress a law school admissions committee. In my opinion, that is not the way to go about it. Pursue your passion, pursue something that I think is in a good professional setting that demonstrates discretion, demonstrates judgment, demonstrates independence, demonstrates your work ethic and your character. You can shine in so many things that are not legal and in legal environments. And so I'm kind of the latter camp of it doesn't have to be a legal job.
Thank you, Shane. Our last question for today, just rounding it out, this person asks, how many schools should I apply to? What is the good average number of applications?
I don't think that there's a one-size-fits-all answer for people. Everyone has the sort of economic constraints and time constraints. Because what do I mean by that? Well, economic constraints, we get it. Like you can only apply to so many schools before it just becomes cost prohibitive. So there's that. I think it's smart to pick a range of schools, like I said at the beginning of this webinar, that gives you a reasonable range of opportunities so that you're not at the end of the cycle with, no choice or limited choices. So you have to think through, how many schools does that look like? And then the other part is the quality of application piece. If you have the time to produce several applications of high quality and the economic resources to do so and the interest level in those schools to do so, then your answer may be I'm applying to a bunch of schools. If you're limited and you think you can craft a smaller number of good, well thought out applications, and then I think you want to think through doing that. What I don't recommend is going to a wide array of schools without the ability to really produce good applications to those particular schools.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jane, for your time today and for answering all of our audience questions. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for sending in your questions. We appreciate your participation. Got a lot of questions. If we weren't able to get to your question and you'd like us to try and connect you with some resources, you can always reach us at support.justia.com and we will do our best to address any outstanding questions you may have. We want to thank you all so much for joining us for another Justia webinar. Law students, as I mentioned at the start of today's presentation, in addition to career-oriented webinars like today's program, Justia also has a growing suite of services to help you succeed in your job search, whether that's now or later. Justia Legal Jobs is a comprehensive legal job board with thousands of opportunities across the U.S. with remote opportunities as well. If you'd like to get started in searching today, you can go to justia.jobs. Also, if you're a lawyer in the audience and you're looking for new talent as a Justia Connect member, you can also post on Justia Legal Jobs if you would like to get in front of those eyes. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you all so much for joining. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did enjoy it, please click the like button and subscribe to our channel for more videos on law practice and legal marketing. See you in our next video.